Before I mention very quickly, because I can mention it in one sentence, the metaphor that I live by, I wanted to talk about something else, which is in the Buddhist or Dharma tradition, or there's three schools, but the in the school of Mahayana, there's many sutras or many teachings, and I imagine that it could fill volumes, thick volumes that thick, and so most people could spend a lifetime and not get through the entire set of sutras with any seriousness. One could just sort of superficially read everything, and maybe that would be about it. And so there's this, whenever one's confronted with a large volume of information, there are others who may have spent a lot of time going through it, and they want to squeeze it down they want to condense it into its essence. And there's a sutra that has squeezed down these various teachings within the school, the Mahayana school, down to its essence. And so one could call it the Essence Sutra. Now in English, when we want to say, let's get to the essence of something, the word that's sometimes used is heart. Let's get to the heart of the matter. And so oftentimes this sutra is referred to as the Heart Sutra. It's easy to think, like, if one is new to all this and hears the word Heart Sutra, it's easy to think, oh, this must be about love or compassion because it's the Heart Sutra, so the heart, love, and connection. No, but that's not what the Heart Sutra is. The word heart in this case is acting as a synonym to essence or core. So I often think of the Heart Sutra as simply the Essence Sutra, or the Core Sutra. It gets to the core or essence of this large volume of teachings or sutras on the Mahayana school of the philosophy of the Mahayana. And so the Heart Sutra is something that I think you could just read within a minute or two. I've never timed it. But and it's fairly straightforward. But at the very end of the Heart Sutra is a mantra. And I don't know the name of the mantra, but I imagine people refer to it as the Heart Sutra mantra. And it goes, Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisoha. And I don't know the exact translation, but usually the translation is something like gone, gone, gone beyond, gone something Buddha, whatever. Anyway, I'm just focused on the first few words, Gate, gate, parasamgate, gone, gone, gone beyond. And the image I've always had is of like the Buddha in like a misty sort of field, sort of going beyond the shores of suffering, life, birth, death, rebirth, and so on. But the image I have is of the Buddha sort of fading away and sort of in obscure mist and eventually sort of disappearing. And so it's like, and by the way, related to that, we often think of the word nirvana, and nirvana literally is translated usually to the extinguishing, as an extinguishing of a flame. So sometimes people will say nirvana is the extinguishing of the flame of passions, or the three poisons, and some refer to it as the extinguishing of self. The self, this contrived self that I've talked about in previous videos. Or one could say the ego self, the extinguishing of like this constant play of thoughts, or this extinguishing of a self that believes itself to exist as an independent entity. And so this, again, that being nirvana, this image of gone, gone, gone beyond, sort of like this being sort of fading away into nothingness. The word that I like to use is dissolution, dissolving away. And again, in previous videos, I've talked about this notion of the thinning of self, or the fading or dissolving of self. And I've related that to the phenomena of getting out of oneself, or having, or being so immersed in an activity where one enters what we call a flow state, to where there is almost the loss of I, the loss of self, and it's just the engagement, the task itself at hand. So one could be, for example, playing music, or I can't say I've had that experience, but playing a sport, or thinking or meditating, to where the sense of self just thins out and wears out. And so, anyways, when my friend said, "What's the metaphor that informs your spiritual life?" I said, "It's becoming nothing." And so that's a shorthand. I don't literally mean like becoming nothing, but it was. I didn't want to explain everything I just explained, but we had already had these conversations. So he says, "Oh yeah, you've talked about that before." And so I guess I could have rephrased it as the metaphor is of the self sort of dissolving away and fading away. And so there's not a lot of struggle in that. It's not like, oh, I'm going to arduously climb a mountain. And of course, if I do this every single day, every single moment, pretty soon I'm fatigued and I want to take a long break. No, it's actually the fading away of self. And so it's not something that I do. What I do is I try to practice. But the practice is to create a climate or a milieu to where the self becomes weaker and less significant. Another way to say it is the metaphor is for the self to become less and less important to myself. For the insignificance of self to arise more clearly. So that's a metaphor that happens to resonate for me much deeper than climbing a mountain or swimming upstream. And it's not that I chose that because it keeps me from being fatigued, but it's something that sort of resonates to the core of my being, to my heart. And it's a metaphor that inspires me to put in more effort, to practice and to show up to whatever spiritual practices I have and spiritual attitudes that I might pursue. And so, but the upshot of that is that there is no sense of fatigue. In fact, I would say that the more I practice, the less fatigue I have, because the source of most of my fatigue is self, right? Like, life is full of strife and difficulties, but I would say the amount of, by the way, I've heard it said a different way, that I've heard a number of people say this. They've said this: if people talk to me the way I talk to myself, I would have to beat them up or I would have to kill them. I've heard that comment. So similarly, if life put as much of a burden that I put on myself, that the self imposes upon whatever this is, I would die from pressure. Like, life has strife, and the situations and circumstances can be stressful, but the amount of stress that's put on by my own neurotic tendencies, my own sort of clinging and attachments, and my own aversion, fears, and so on, that I impose, that I inflict upon myself, is so much more. And so the path of going toward the dissolution of self actually lessens the burden of self. And so as the burden of self is lessened, it's not that I become more fatigued, I become lighter, and life becomes more transparent or more translucent, more open. Now, I don't think, my experience isn't that life becomes easier. In fact, life, I think, becomes harder, because since I'm lighter, I have more capacity. So then it seems like life's like, okay, Yuichi, you don't have a heavy enough load, so let's pile more onto your plate because you're a little freer. And that's how I would describe my experience of living, is that the less of the self, the greater the burden that life imposes. And that's fine, because it's still about the same in totality. And so, not that any of these, not that these quantitative comments matter, but the point being that if my primary metaphor that I'm living my spiritual life by is climbing a mountain, I'm not surprised to hear my friends say, well, he wants to take a break because of fatigue. And so I've just talked about 3 metaphors for spiritual life, but I imagine that there are many. And again, going back to the first video of this series, it's not much of a series, it's just 2 parts, but I think it's worth reflecting on what are the spiritual metaphors that undergird your spiritual life, your spiritual practice, and how does it support you, but also how does it what are some of the liabilities? What are some of the restrictions or burdens that come about through having or adopting that primary metaphor as the sort of structuring or undergirding metaphor for your spiritual life? Anyways, I hope you found a little excursion into the Heart Sutra or the mantra. You could easily probably type in Heart Sutra mantra and then type in the word gate, G-A-T-E, twice, gate, and that's gate. And if you typed in meaning, I'm sure you could get to the meaning. I was pretty sloppy about that. Anyway, that's all.